Recording has started. Okay, so yeah, welcome again to this very first webinar of Changing Transport Insights. Today with the focus topic, shifting freight transport from road to rail in Indonesia. I'm today here as the facilitator of the session, but also as the presenter. This is a new series we have launched from the GIZ Changing Transport team as a way to present the interesting work that we're doing around the world, not only what we're doing, but also to give insight on how are we actually working in international technical cooperation and what are the results that we are achieving, and also to tell stories of maybe things that didn't go so well. The series is meant to communicate to a wider audience of what we do across the world, especially across regions. That's why, today the topic is a country in Asia, but we do it in the afternoon here so that maybe also audiences in Northern America or South America could participate and learn what we do in Latin America. And we want to keep it a very light concept, so not unnecessarily long and focused on only snapshots of our work and not trying to give you the entire picture of the things that we're doing. And the upcoming webinars will be on China and on Colombia. They will be in February and in March, and then further webinars are going to follow. Now let's start moving into the content of the presentation. What I'm going to present today has happened in the context of the transfer project. The transfer project has been one of the longest running transport and climate change projects of GIZ. It ran from 2010 to 2022 with the objective to support selected partner countries in their efforts to develop transport mitigation actions to reduce CO2, that is. And the project has been tremendously successful, as now there are more than 10 ready to implement mitigation actions in several partner countries. Some of them are already under implementation and have started reducing CO2, but the total mitigation effect of the mitigation actions that have been developed with the help of the transfer project is more than 100 megatons of CO2, and a lot of international and domestic funds have been mobilized to support the implementation. And Indonesia has been a partner country of transfer in its first phase, but also now in the last phase, the Transfer 3 project. Let's now move on a little bit into Indonesia for the rest of the presentation. Transport emissions in Indonesia are shown here in the black bar. 3 observations. First of all, transport has overtaken the industry sector as the second biggest emitter in Indonesia, in the Indonesian energy sector. That happened when? That happened in 2011, so about 10 years ago. And then transport emissions have roughly tripled actually since the year 2000. So we started in 2000 at around 50 million tons, and today we are over 150 million tons. And the total transport emissions of Indonesia are as high as 150 million tons today, which is really, really significant. This is actually more than the entire Philippines emit. And I think it tells you how essential actually the decarbonization of Indonesia's transport sector is. To break it down further, roughly 75% of Indonesia's transport emissions or fuel consumption is from the passenger transport sector, and freight makes up a little bit more than 25% of the transport-related fuel consumption. Most of this consumption is by trucks, so by the road freight sector, and less than from freight ships or trains or planes. And now you could say, why did Transfer decide to work on freight transport with the partners? Well, when we started with our initiative in Indonesia, there have already been multiple initiatives by the government and by international organizations in Indonesia that have worked on urban and passenger transport climate action, including by GIZ actually. And that is why Transfer agreed with the local partners to focus the cooperation on freight transport. But a second reason why working on freight transport made sense to also the Indonesian government partners is the aspect of the logistic cost. Indonesia's logistic costs are relatively high. I don't know if you're familiar with the Logistic Performance Index, the LPI. That's an index established by the World Bank that many countries are very interested in. And you can, and the lower the score here in this ranking, the better. You see that Singapore usually has a score of less than 10. That means it has always been in the top 10, yeah, globally in terms of its logistics performance, whereas Indonesia, it has been improving over the years, yeah, but it's still relatively high compared to its regional peers. And logistic costs are determined by many factors, but one of them is the transport costs. Transport costs domestically in Indonesia are relatively high, and so there's a case to make transport more efficient and less costly in Indonesia. And that's why I think our partners were keen to work with us on freight transport. Of course, there are a lot of different angles or ways through which CO2 reduction in the freight transport sector is possible. In the dialogue with our counterparts, we decided that we work on two different aspects. The first one on the right is the truck fleet modernization. We came up with a concept for how to accelerate the renewal of the Indonesian truck fleets. And the other aspect on the left, that's the focus of today, is intermodal freight transport. So basically facilitating a shift of freight flows from the road to the rail, specifically on the main island of Java. And the approach of Transfer across its partner countries has always been to work not only on the technical aspects of the different policies and actions that could be done, but also to assess the impacts ex ante of these actions in terms of CO2, but also the socioeconomic benefits, to study then the financial aspects, so how much funding would be required and how such funding could be delivered, and then to integrate all these different insights into a concept document as a plan of action. And so this would be the ready to implement mitigation action in the end. Of course, I didn't work on this alone. I had a wonderful team in Indonesia. I was working with Joel and with Lena, two very talented colleagues that did the day-to-day work in Indonesia. I was based in Germany, steering them from afar, but luckily they were very independent and I didn't have to steer too much. So together with them, of course, we had a lot of dialogue events. We not only had consultants who did studies, but we organized multiple stakeholder consultation events and surveys throughout the year to learn about the current concerns that the stakeholders have and to develop our solutions in a participatory manner. And we also had these dialogues to understand what industry thinks, and to get their perspectives on board and to build a supportive alliances of the stakeholder. Because of the pandemic, here you can clearly see that our stakeholder engagements became more virtual over time. At the beginning of this timeline here, you see group pictures, but later only screenshots of virtual events we did throughout the years. Now, let's focus a bit more on the rail freight transport. Our focus here was on the region of Java, which is the geographic and economic center of Indonesia, and it's home to more than half of the Indonesian population. So it's really where most of the action economically and also CO2 wise happens in Indonesia. When you compare Germany and Java, one thing to note is they have roughly a similar size, geographically speaking. The kilometers from north to south in Germany are the same as the kilometers from east to west in Java. In both countries, road transport is the dominant mode of freight, and also the shares of waterways and of air transport are quite similar. The only thing that's different here between Java and Indonesia is the modal share of railways. In Germany, has been stagnating around 8 to 9%. No, sorry, around 17%, whereas in Indonesia it's between 1 and 2%. The good thing, though, is that Indonesia has ambitious goals. The plan is to increase this share of freight transport on Java, or no, in Indonesia as a whole, to 11% until the year 2030. So it's an increase, a significant increase, and that's why I think, our support was quite vital. So of course the road transport is dominating, and that will likely to be the same remain. But rail freight volume has been growing rapidly over the past years, and is expected to continue to grow, mainly due to the recovery of the construction sector, because there's more and more coal production on the island of Sumatra, and also because significant investments are planned into the rail transport infrastructure throughout Indonesia. So there is rail freight transport on Sumatra, but mostly for the extractive industries, and on Java. And Java is the only country with an integrated and well-developed railway network. But on Java, where a lot of rail transport happens, it's mostly passenger transport rather than freight transport. And passenger transport is also where the political priority of the Indonesian government has been, from our observation. The main goods that are transported via railways on Java have been, first of all, containers, followed by cement and fuel. Now, when you work on, or when you think about shifting freight transport from road to rail, you need to know what are the determinants for mode choice. Generally, there are, of course, the demand matters. So do the shippers, the owners of the goods, they are interested, what does it cost? How long does it take? Is it reliable? How often are the services? So this is what determines the demand. In terms of the supply, depends here, is there rail transport infrastructure and facilities for the modal shift? How are the connections? And of course, also the regulations are an important determinant. So does the government have ambitious goals in terms of modal shift, for example, or in terms of CO2 reduction in the freight transport sector? And is it working on a regulation to help this freight transport sector to shift or to use more the railways? But in the end, with all that in place, the final mode choice is highly dependent on the specific characteristics of the cargo and of the cargo flow. So aspects that are relevant here are the distance, that a good needs to be transported. Railways only make sense for longer distances, maybe minimum 300 kilometers. Then the type of the good, not all commodities are suited for rail transport, but many are. The size of the shipment, but also in the end, the person who takes the decision which mode to use has certain preferences. And so you see many determinants that come into play. Of course, from our transfer project perspective, we looked at the main determinants, at how can we improve the infrastructure and work with the policymakers but also with the market to create a better supply. So why isn't there more rail freight on Java? We did a lot of consultations to find out why, and did this root cause analysis. First of all, there's a perception that it is more costly than road transport. That has to do with, for example, subsidies that road enjoys, but that are not available to rail transport. It has to do with the transit time. So there's a perception that if you take the train rather than the truck, it will just take much longer for your goods to arrive because there are waiting times at the terminal, for example, for transshipment, which you wouldn't have if you take the truck. And last but not least, there's a perception that simply the services are not so reliable, not safe. Maybe the goods get stolen or damaged. These are concerns that we heard often from the industry stakeholders, why they decide or why they prefer road over rail. But underlying, under these perceptions is, of course, a lack of adequate infrastructure. So the railway network, the connectivity between different railway lines, terminals, then the connection between the main railway lines and the ports and also the industrial estates are not always available. So this is really where the supply needs to be improved. Then there are not many operators of rail transport or service providers. There's actually only one state-owned enterprise that is active in the market and very few independent service providers. And last but not least, it seems that despite ambitious goals, the policy priorities in the relevant ministries is really more on passenger transport, and the lobby for trucking is very strong, but there is no strong alliance of stakeholders who push for better regulation to help the rail freight sector. Now, to address all these issues, in our technical design study, we came up with this very comprehensive action program. You see here the summary diagram from our technical design study showing you all the measures. And this has been our very first proposal in the process, and it's a programmatic mix of regulations, of investments, of pricing instruments, and many actions to enhance the cooperation of the important players in the system. I will not go here into the details, but this was basically our first step or our first push or our first basically proposal. Then in the further discussion with the government, but also with our advisors locally, we came up with a more focused idea, focused mainly on improving the infrastructure, because this has been identified as one of the key problems that must be addressed, without which the other problems are cannot be addressed either. So the second proposal that we then came up with, building on the first one, is to focus our support on a selection of infrastructure projects. So the infrastructure projects would be unified under the umbrella of an investment program, which includes common principles and common standards, yeah, for the development of the project. So not standalone individual projects, but a program of projects with common rules. And the idea here was that by bundling individual projects into a larger program, it would become more attractive for development banks to provide assistance. And in our financial design study, based on which this proposal is based, we had very good consultants from PwC, yeah, who also found through stakeholder interviews that focusing on concrete investments would be the most promising course of action, rather than this very broad program that I presented in the previous slide. Now, these are the infrastructure investments that the programmatic approach includes. Yeah, it's mainly 5 projects that have been selected in accordance with the Indonesian government investment priorities. To give you a little bit more insight of what these investments look like. Here, the first one, for example, you can see is in Jakarta, the Jakarta main port. Here, the railway line stops at the JICT station at the moment, so it does not go into the port. So if you want to transport your goods by rail to the port, you still have to transport them into the port by a truck. And to improve that situation, here in green, you can see this would be the extension. One could build, or one could extend the railway tracks to reach into the port. Another project here in Rongo Wasito, yeah, has a similar approach, also extending the railway line to reach into the port premises. And the same here for the port of Teluk Lamong. So this is the kind of projects, yeah, that are included in our investment program, simply to make it more attractive, yeah, for the freight transport industry, for shippers, yeah, to use the rail when the rail reaches directly into the port. But the program also includes investment projects to connect industrial parks better to the main railway line, so that also it's not necessary to use the truck to transport goods to the train, but they can be directly packed onto the train from the industrial estate. Yeah, in the design of this programmatic investment program, we looked at, on the one hand, how much do these investment costs? Here we have figures in Indonesian rupee. 10 billion Indonesian rupee is actually not that much in euro. It's about 700,000 euro, so less than $1 million, yeah, for this investment. Then here 400 billion, yeah, that is around 26 million euro. So, I mean, for a development bank, again, not a huge amount of money. Then we also looked into what could be potential funding mechanisms, yeah, that can be implemented in this program. So how would the funding flow? And we looked at funding from the state budget, so from Ministry of Finance to the Ministry of Transport, and then invested into the project. We looked at funding through a loan, yeah, from a multilateral development bank, for example, like in Germany, the KfW, and Bappenas is the planning ministry with selected projects, and a grant or loan would come from the development bank to the Ministry of Transport. And the third alternative that we investigated was through a public-private partnership, where also private investors could contribute their funds. This was done in our financial study. I think the solution that we further investigated and discussed with donors was alternative number 2. So a loan from a development bank. In order to, of course, convince our counterparts that this is a worthwhile idea, so we had to study the socioeconomic benefits from this programmatic approach. To show that it makes sense for the economy, but for the sector, because it will simply save a lot of time and cost for the freight transport industry, and for the it would also make sense for the Indonesian NDC for the climate change goals, because significant CO2 emissions could be saved through these interventions. Our program proposal also included a program management structure to outline how the different stakeholders or different agencies in Indonesia would have to work together to implement such a program. Here you can see the steering structure of that we have proposed. So this was basically, in a nutshell, a very quick run through, a short summary of the investment program. A lot of interesting things happened, however, throughout the project that we hope that we had an influence on, but we cannot claim to, or not claim that we directly did this as with our GIZ project. The first of all one is that the government streamlined the licensing regulations for multimodal transport operators. So now that it is easier for companies who are interested in multimodal transport operations to do such a business. Before, it was really cumbersome to get this license, and that's why there were only very few service providers. The government also liberalized the foreign ownership regulations for logistic businesses, so that now the DHL or DB Schenkers of the world are allowed to operate in Indonesia in this market. So now there is an expectation that there would be more competition in the market, and because of more competition, also more innovation, and hopefully better service quality in the future. Then of course the pandemic happened, but for the rail freight sector, this was a positive development, you could say, because there was suddenly a lot of capacity available on the railway network because fewer passenger trains were going. And the railway operator had to look for alternative business to passenger transport. And that's why it put much more attention than ever before on freight transport, and realized, oh, this is actually a business area that we should strengthen. So they launched several new services and partnerships with different industries, for example, the Indonesian postal services or with the fuel industry, and developed new services with, for example, from ports and to industrial estates that didn't exist before, and now that also still exist after the pandemic. In 2021, also the NDC roadmap of Indonesia that supports the NDC included rail freight as a possible mitigation action. So this is like a nice supportive reference that is important. And there has been an MOU last year, between different state-owned enterprises for railways, for ports, and for postal services, who now want to work closer together, so that the silos between different organizations are now coming down. And I think especially the cooperation between railways and port enterprises supports our agenda of improving the connection between railway and port system. Then there were also several presidential decrees in support of the connection of railways to ports and in industrial estates, and in the Ministry of Transport's annual and midterm investment plans, also several rail infrastructure projects were included. So you can see that a lot of positive momentum occurred over the past 3 years while we were working with the government and the industry stakeholders on our program. Now, of course, not everything worked out the way we wanted. I said has been quite positive momentum in the rail freight market in general, but when it comes to concrete new infrastructure projects, specifically on Java, then there has been little visible progress. A lot of projects are in the pipeline and have been and are at advanced stages of planning, but the projects haven't started yet, and I haven't seen much development recently, I'm afraid. And this has to do with the fact that such investment projects are often seen as a business-to-business service, not something where the government feels it is their role to invest in it. And in addition, the budgetary priority is more to serve the Indonesian population, the people. So strengthening passenger railways in Java is definitely where the focus is quite heavily on, and less so on railways. Also, we struggled a little bit with the buy-in from the Ministry of Transport for the proposed program approach. This is still a work in progress, to increase the ownership. For the development banks, it's very important that the projects or any program that they could put their money to are included in the so-called Blue Book in Indonesia. The Blue Book is a list of investment projects and that want to aim or that they want to use so financial assistance, and anything that's not in this Blue Book has very little chance of getting international funding from development partners. And unfortunately, none of the projects that we have included in our program have made it so far into the Blue Book. It's quite a lengthy process, and that's something that I hope will happen in the future. Our program has received quite strong interest from other development partners, such as KfW, for example, but also ADB or World Bank. But of course, they expect that, or they say that, well, for us to support with the further development of this program, we need to see more ownership from the Ministry of Transport or from the Indonesian government before we agree to provide stronger support. In general, for us as GIZ, it has sometimes been difficult to get information on, where do the various projects stand at the moment. Is the feasibility study completed, or has it been started? And also to get these studies has been quite a headache. And also the evaluation of the CO2 impact, of course, is quite important for us as transfer, because our agenda is transport and climate change, and something that we have in our indicators. And we have, of course, calculated the possible mitigation first for this very comprehensive action program. And there we also had a very big figure of CO2 reduction. It was ranging from 7 to 23 megatons by 2030. But then that number changed significantly when we scaled down our action program to only infrastructure investment, and it was only in the in the order of 500,000 tons of CO2. So from several million to a few hundred thousands. So a significant reduction in terms of the impact that we expect to occur when the projects are implemented. So yeah, I think we learned that for the future, a very broad or much broader stakeholder engagement will be necessary. Further ministries need to be more closely involved to design the program and move it further towards implementation, so that there is really like an alliance of stakeholders that supports this agenda, and not only us and GIZ as a project together with the Minister of Transport. Okay, I think that has been my last slide already. It has, yes. So with that, I hope you found it interesting. And if you have any questions, now is the time for us to have a discussion. Questions for clarification or even comments? Just jump in.
Yeah, so
Alex, your hand was, yes, your hand was first.
Thank you so much for your great presentation. I'm curious to know, or if you have or have not known about any plans on implementing perhaps an integrated controlling system to enable the use of cargo on the new high-speed rail, or if this is being prohibited, or if this would have any impact at all.
No, this is not something that we have looked into at all. The interrelationship with the new high-speed rail. But of course, the high-speed rail is basically what caught most of the political attention there over the past years as a very high-profile project. So for us, it has basically we sometimes struggle to get a bit of attention with our rail freight agenda, because the high-speed rail, mainly for passenger, got all the political attention. Jürgen, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, let me raise three topics. The first one is something that we have observed in the Berlin region when the wall came down. But I think it's not only the Berlin region and the freight transport between Eastern Europe and the west part of Europe. It also is something which is taking place in countries like India, where you see that there is a big group of people who fear to lose the job when there would be the modal shift going from road to rail. All the truck drivers are not really interested to use rail solutions, because at the German-Polish border, for example, for the truck drivers, it was always fine to wait 3-4 days to cross the border from Germany to Poland. That meant for them they get additional payments as long as they are in Germany, because they get a top-up payment. And I assume that things like that also happen in other parts of the world. So when we are looking at this question, we should also find strategies how to convince the logistic companies and the people who work in these companies, especially the drivers, that there are enough advantages for them. They don't lose their jobs, or they get alternative jobs who are maybe more comfortable. You mentioned that there are containers and they are afraid of the security of the goods. So it might be that there should be a solution that a former truck driver now gets a job as a safety guard on a train to protect the containers who are transported by train. Something like that, just simple ideas. But this is something where you have lots of resistance to be aware if you want to get this modal shift running. The second point is, and you mentioned this as well, time. In the logistics sector, time is very often a critical topic. You need to get the containers from A to B in a defined time, and it has to be clear that they really reach the end of the line as it was planned before. I was part of a team developing the freight centers around Berlin, and we had a very good time at this at the early 90s, mid 90s. We got a container terminal in the south of Berlin from German Railway, and it should be connected to the Hamburg harbor. The problem was that German Railway was not able to send a container from the south of Berlin within 6 hours to Hamburg harbor, because the train runs only every 2 days, and they only run a train when they have about, I don't know, 30 containers in one train. And it is always taken out from the main line when a passenger train comes in, because the passenger transport has priority on the tracks. So it was not only that they haven't had a schedule that was sufficient for the logistic company, it was also the time that they took, and they couldn't guarantee that the container is in Hamburg at the harbor on time when it should be delivered to the ship to go, or the other way around, and goes back. So these are some things which are to be solved if you really want to get a modal shift. And when you are looking at the tracks, there is a problem that I have learned when we had the discussion, why don't we send the ICE from Germany, from Cologne to Paris? The French system, the high-speed system, is planned and is installed in a way that the TGV, which is a much lighter train than the ICE is, can run on it. So the German systems, German train could not run on the tracks in France, not because of the size like with Russia, but just because they are too heavy. And this has also been taken into account. So the high-speed system for the passenger trains would be much more expensive if you want to make them also available for for freight trains. So you would need a separate line or system of lines to run freight transport on it. And we see this also here in other areas in Germany, that freight transport is never prioritized. They always have to wait. I can see it here in Bonn. They are waiting for getting down the Rhine to Basel, and they have always to wait until the passenger trains are through. This is something which slows down the freight transport and is not really supporting the modal shift. That would be also a question: how can we get the Ministry of Transport in Indonesia to understand that they could be champions when they start to plan and develop specific systems for rail freight transport with own tracks. The last remark would be, you have discussed about funding. I haven't seen that you have taken into account the Green Climate Fund. Is that part of your alternative, where you have been talking about multilateral development banks, or didn't you look at the option to fund? You have correctly put together lots of projects. That would be something that could be brought from Indonesia to the Green Climate Fund to ask for funding from their side.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thanks for your questions and your observations. Maybe first on this topic of the truck drivers and their resistance to such an initiative, or to modal shift in general. Of course, the trucking industry is not interested in getting more freight on the railway. That makes sense. But our argument has always been where the market for freight transport is in such a steep growth, so that we're not taking away from the trucking industry. With this growth, the trucking industry cannot cover all this growth in freight transport, some of it will need to be covered by rail freight. So concerning the future growth, rail freight must be part of the picture. And I think we have seen it in Germany. We have truck driver shortage. It's not that there is unlimited trucking capacity available. There's a shortage of workers. And I know in Thailand it's the same. I'm not quite sure about Indonesia if they have also truck driver shortage, but potentially yes. And then concerning your topic of the Green Climate Fund, it's not something that we have investigated in detail, but yes, of course, you're right. Yeah, it is a potential source of funds for such an initiative. But under the transfer project, we have not developed a proposal or something like that in that direction. And then, Jan, you have a question? I saw your hand.
Yes. Thank you, and hi, Friedel. Thanks
Hi.
for the presentation. I was really curious to see what you did in Indonesia on that topic. I have a few questions. The first one is I wasn't sure if you mentioned or assess the kind of potential it could represent in terms of modal shift. I'm not sure you mentioned it or I've read it. So if you can, tell me if you assess, like, I don't know, what could be the share in a way of rail freight in 30 years or whatever, by 2050 or something like this. Second question was very interesting. Complex and interesting. The slide. On the governance with the different actors, and I'm unsure again, but if you have been able to be in touch with either environmental and finance ministries in the loop at some point, or if it was mostly focused with the transport ministry, and so that's just to understand, because we know all the fights that could exist between the different ministries. So I was curious to know if you had this opportunity to discuss it with them. And I had a last question about the financing, just to know if you had the opportunity concretely with the development bank to, you said that the project were at this stage not ongoing, but you mapped out or you identified a certain number of projects with values behind it and investment amount. I wanted to know if you, if you already finance, and if the KfW or I don't know, or through which shame, but if if the German Development Corporation already start financing some of these infrastructure projects, or if it was only, let's say, in planning still.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks a lot.
Yeah. So many questions. So the last question. No, none of these projects that are in our program are so far funded yet or receive any funding through the German government or any other donor. That has to do with that they are not yet in the green book and the blue book, for such investment projects. But in our dialogue with the German Development Bank, the KfW, who have worked on the rail sector in Indonesia, passenger rail, in the past, they were quite keen on this idea, and were actually helping us a lot in the origination of this concept. But again, they expect that there is stronger ownership from the main counterpart, the Ministry of Transport, in order to continue that dialogue. In terms of the stakeholder dialogue, yes, we have always made an attempt to be very inclusive and have invited agencies from environment and finance, and they have also participated in our stakeholder consultation events. And when I was there on a mission, we also had bilateral meetings with them. So yes, they were informed on this. But of course, the Minister of Finance always has to be conservative in terms of its expenditures and has certain investments priorities. And when we discuss, for example, subsidies with them, the potential to maybe subsidize rail freight, they were not very supportive of this idea. Okay, I think I missed one question.
Yeah, the first one, just about the, like, if you identify what could be actually
the modal
role.
share.
Yeah.
Yes, we did, but now I didn't write down the numbers. And I can send it to you afterwards. I'm afraid I don't have it now at hand, but
okay. No,
we
don't
did it
worry.
as
No,
part of our CO2 calculation. Yeah,
okay.
Sorry, I don't have it.
Okay, don't worry. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you then all for your questions and for your interest. I think we have also come to the end of our time. Actually already over time, but I think that's my fault because I presented longer than I should have. But anyways, thank you very much for joining. You will definitely be informed about our next webinars when they are due. I hope to see you again, and then I wish you all a very nice weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye-bye.